My life changed forever on that fateful Saturday in September, when I first realized that I could no longer hide behind the mask that was imposed on me. That day, I realized that all my struggles were pointless, and I became completely visible, the way I really was. Cassidy Marie Stewart. It's a name that seems to haunt me all my life. It belonged to me, but the moment my father shouted it out, I felt that it had become alien. Every word that came out of his mouth was like an icy rain that penetrated into the very soul. It was the last drop in the cup that overflowed. I could no longer live under their cruel gaze, under this endless pressure that they represented. I heard my father roar, his face red with rage. That was the moment when I realized that everything I had done before didn't matter. They just didn't see me. I flinched when he threw my last report card on the kitchen table, as if it were some insignificant piece of paper that didn't even deserve to be held in his hands. The report card appeared in front of me as a vivid reminder of my inability to meet their incredibly high standards. All those numbers and letters that reflected my successes and failures now became a heavy burden for me that I couldn't carry. And so, my father, without hiding his rage, uttered words that should have made me realize how disappointed I had disappointed them. "I can't believe you brought this shame to our house," he said, and his words pierced me in a way that nothing could. My mother hissed back, her voice full of disappointment, resentment, as if all the love she once felt for me had now become nothing. "After all we've done to give you the best opportunities in life, this is how you pay us. I'm sorry." I suffocated. Everything I had ever hoped to do, all my efforts, seemed like nothing now. I really tried, but chemistry was a wall for me that I couldn't overcome. Mr. Walters, our teacher, was too strict, too fast. I tried to keep up with him, but even my best contribution couldn't help. It was like a battle where I was already doomed to defeat from the very beginning. Apologetically, I tried to explain, but my father abruptly interrupted me. "Your sister Juliet is doing well in all advanced classes. Why can't you be more like her? Juliet, the perfect daughter, with perfect grades and perfect looks. Why can't you be at least a little bit like her?" And those words tore me apart. I could never be like her. How could she be? Juliet is perfection. This is the image that everyone aspired to: perfect appearance, impeccable grades, grace in every movement. She was everything my parents thought was worthy. And no matter how hard I tried, I still remained in the shadow of her perfection. I've always tried to be better, but I've always felt out of place. I could never be Juliet. "I'm not Juliet," I blurted out. Anger was rising in my chest, but I knew I needed to say it. It was my last chance to be heard. Not Juliet, not her shadow. I wanted to be myself, even if it meant being rejected. My mother's eyes flashed with indignation. "Watch your tone, young lady," she hissed. "You should be grateful for the privileged life we've given you, grateful for everything we've done so that you can have the best opportunities." And then I realized that I had lived my whole life not for myself, but for them. The clothes I wore, the friends I was allowed to have, the classes I attended, even my haircut, it was all part of their control. I wasn't myself, I was just a doll, part of a perfect family portrait that had no place for me. I saw the slap coming, but I didn't flinch. The pain that burned my cheek was not as painful as the realization that I was just a figure in their world that they could move at will. I heard my father's angry voice. "How dare you speak to us with such disrespect? We sacrificed everything to give you the best, and this is how you repay us." A fancy vacation, a country club membership, that's what they thought was important. But what did I want? I didn't ask for any of this. All I ever wanted was their love and recognition. But no matter what I did, no matter how hard I tried, tears always flowed down my face. Every time I tried to prove my worth, I was faced with misunderstanding and contempt. I stopped to catch my breath, but at that moment I couldn't hide my feelings. My mother and father stood in front of me, stunned, not understanding me. I'm tired of trying to be someone I'm not. I want to live my life on my own terms, I said, unable to restrain myself any longer. My soul was filled with determination, although my hands were shaking with fear and excitement. But it was my decision, and now I was ready to accept the consequences. After my words hung in the air, there was a tense silence. It was so thick and heavy that it seemed like I could literally feel it squeezing me like a vice, and every breath became more difficult. Sometimes even silence can be scarier than a scream, and now I felt it on my own skin. The whole room was filled with expectation, as if an invisible storm was about to break out. My father was the first to break the silence. His voice sounded like a hammer striking metal, cold and icy, devoid of any warmth. "I will not tolerate this rebellious attitude under my roof," he thundered, and in his words I felt not only threat, but also helplessness hidden behind a futile desire for control. "You have two options: comply with our rules starting today, or leave." His words pierced me like a knife, leaving a painful mark. For a moment, I wondered what I should do. A whirlwind of feelings rose up inside me: fear, doubt, despair, but something in this sentence was so final, so liberating. I knew that if I stayed, I would forever remain in this cage, a cage made of ideals and expectations that I could not and did not want to justify. I couldn't pretend everything was okay anymore. My whole life has been a game in which I was constantly losing. If I stay here, I will be a prisoner of these walls for the rest of my days. The burn of indignation in my gut overcame all my fears. My gaze became firm, determined. I straightened up, despite all my trembling limbs, and looked my parents straight in the eye. I saw shock and rage in their eyes. They couldn't believe what was happening, and I felt their world crumbling. And at that moment, I finally made a choice. Turning around, I hurriedly ran upstairs. My pounding heart wouldn't let me think about anything other than what I'd just done. It was not just a step, but a whole leap into the unknown. Suddenly, I realized that now, at this second, everything would change. I'm not going back to them. I can't go back. While I was packing my things, just a few basic necessities, my heart was beating so hard in my chest that it seemed like it was about to burst out. I was only 16 years old, I was alone, and I was going to become homeless. But strangely, that was the only thing I felt: freedom. Not pain, not fear, but freedom. I didn't fully understand it, but the feeling was so strong that I decided to go all the way. My belongings were meager, and every step I took felt like a heavy burden. Ignoring all these familiar objects, I went outside. The scorching midday sun burned my skin, and I realized that a new reality was beginning outside the house. I wandered aimlessly through the suburban streets, trying to focus on what I should do now. When the adrenaline wore off and the reality of my situation finally dawned on me, I felt a cold blow. I was alone, completely alone. I had no money, no place to live, and this whole realization was unbearably weighing on me. Hunger and thirst quickly took over. I didn't even think about taking food or money with me when I ran out of the house. All I knew was that I needed to get out of there as quickly as possible, and it was only after that I realized that it wasn't such an easy decision. In search of water, I noticed the nearest gas station and went there, hoping that I could at least beg for a bottle of water. The cashier, noticing my disheveled condition, did not even bother to look me in the eye. He just snorted, "Hey, you can't hang around here. Buy something or run away from here." His words were like a blow, but I no longer had the strength to respond. I trudged back outside, and the heat hit me again like a living thing. I went, not knowing where. Where should I go? I took out my phone and started scrolling through my contacts, hoping to find salvation at least from someone I know. But I immediately dismissed this thought. Their families were friends of my parents. I couldn't take any chances. I couldn't go back. Suddenly, I came up with an idea that instantly enlightened me. Aunt Nora. She was my mother's ex-sister, whom I hadn't talked to in a long time. I didn't remember her well, but I knew she lived in another city, a few hours away from us. Mom always spoke of her with a venomous tinge, calling her wild, rebellious. But I was desperate. I couldn't think what I was losing. I needed at least a little help. I dialed her number with shaking fingers. After 2 calls, I heard an answer, a warm, rough voice that immediately pierced the silence. "Answer me, well, damn me, little Cassidy, to what do I owe this surprise?" He sounded so sincere and alive that I felt the tension go away. It was the voice of Nora, my aunt, a woman with whom I hardly spoke, but she seemed to be the only person who could understand and accept me for who I am. I hurried to tell her about my situation, not hiding either fear or despair. Nora listened intently, making sympathetic noises that supported me like a warm blanket on an icy night. "Oh, that poor sister. I've never liked her arrogant and domineering attitude," she muttered, and I felt her words refresh my senses like rain after a heat wave. "And your dad sounds like an even bigger job," she continued with a smile in her voice. "Darling, you come right away and stay with me as long as you want. All you need is you're safe here, forget about everything." Her words, simple and sincere, fell on me like rain after a long drought. I felt relief fill me from the inside, and, barely holding back tears, I accepted her offer. She gave me her address, said I could get to her before dark if I hurried. I gathered my strength and listened to her to the end, then hung up, feeling the weight on my shoulders begin to ease. The sun was setting when I finally reached the end of the dusty gravel road that led to Hillview, the small town where Nora and her cottage were. The freshness of the coming evening was in the air when I noticed her, a small, dilapidated house surrounded by overgrown weeds and climbing vines. The porch bells rang in response to the wind, and I cautiously approached, not believing my eyes. It was a completely different world than the one I left behind. Everything was alive. Before I could knock, the door swung open, and I immediately met her gaze. Nora looked the same as I remembered her as a child, tall, with a figure that clearly indicated that she was not afraid of life. Her red hair, with curly curls and gray at the temples, sparkled in the rays of the setting sun. Her blue eyes narrowed in happy surprise as, without saying a word, she hugged me like a long-lost soulmate. She smelled of cinnamon and patchouli, warmth and homely comfort. "Welcome, dear, come in," she said, pulling back to let me in. "You must be starving, poor thing. Let me warm up the soup for you." I followed her into the house, and I was immediately struck by the contrast between this place and the cold, sterile environment of my parents' house. It was a bit of a mess, but it was so cozy, so alive. The shelves were filled with souvenirs and trinkets from various countries. Each piece could be called unique, and the house itself was filled with the spirit of travel, discovery, and wandering. Bold abstract paintings hung on the walls. Their bright colors seemed to try to capture attention, but did not scream, but only quietly led into a world full of free thoughts and new ideas. Nora sat me down at the kitchen table, putting a steaming bowl of tomato and rice soup and a piece of crusty bread in front of me. It was so simple, but at the same time so deep. I squeezed the spoon, not having time to completely take my eyes off this culinary miracle, and almost immediately began to eat, not noticing how quickly I absorbed this taste. It was familiar, soothing, almost homely. I barely had time to utter words of gratitude when Nora gently patted me on the shoulder and, with love in her voice, said, "Eat, love, there are many more things where it came from. You're safe here." My hands, which were constantly shaking, began to calm down, and at that moment I realized that this place had really become a shelter for me. There was no pressure, no demanding looks. Nora didn't judge me, didn't check my every move, didn't try to make me be perfect. In this house, I was just me, and this feeling was so new, so liberating. With each sip of hot soup, I felt all the pain and tension go away, and I could completely relax, for the first time in many years, without feeling that I had to prove something. That night, Without any conditions, I snuggled down under a hand-sewn blanket that smelled faintly of mothballs and fell into a deep, peaceful sleep. I was warm, and at that moment I felt such a calm harmony, which I had not known for a long time. My soul, tired of constant tension, finally let go of all worries. I heard Nora's words in my head again, which seemed to wrap around me, creating a protective cocoon. "You are safe here." These words did not leave me all night and, like magic, gave me the feeling of a real home. It's been a week since I arrived at Nora's cozy cottage, and every day has been a revelation to me. I enjoyed my newfound freedom away from my parents, thanks to their domineering control, which now seemed to me something alien and unnecessary. Nora didn't impose strict rules or schedules on me. She told me that I was a teenager, not a soldier, and that I had to do what made me happy. These words were a revelation to me. I no longer felt like a machine designed to fulfill other people's demands. However, I couldn't get rid of the guilt. Everything I did had something to do with the feeling that I was burdening Nora, that I wasn't grateful enough for her kindness. No matter how much she said I could relax and not worry, deep down I knew that her help had a price, although, of course, Nora never made me feel that way. One morning, over scrambled eggs and bread, I decided to raise a question that had been on my tongue for a long time. "Nora, I thought I really should start working here, at least find a part-time job to help with the bills," I said, but Nora immediately rejected my idea. She smiled and shook her head and said, "Nonsense. You just focus on being yourself. Don't think about such things." But then, tapping her chin thoughtfully with her finger, she added, "Although, if you need something productive to take your time, have you thought about honing your creative talents?" I blinked in surprise, not fully understanding what she meant. "You mean art?" I asked, a little confused, because it never seemed to me that art was something that could become something important to me. As a child, I loved to draw and create, but my mother always said it was a waste of time. Now that Nora was talking about it, I felt a strange thrill of excitement. Nora, noticing my surprise, looked at me with fire in her eyes. "A waste of time? Far from it. Art is an incredible value. It's an expression of the soul." Don't let her poisonous words stop you. It was so sincere that I felt something stir in me. I always felt a craving for drawing, but I held it back, trying to please my parents and meet their endless demands. But Nora was the exact opposite. She not only allowed me to be myself, but also inspired me to reveal my hidden talents. Actually, Nora continued, my friend Tabitha teaches art classes at a community center nearby. I can sign you up if you're interested. The idea struck me with such force that I immediately realized this was a chance. The opportunity to explore your creative abilities without fear of judgment, without guilt and pressure. It sounded like something I've been looking for all my life. I gladly agreed, and Nora grinned and hugged me to her in a fragrant embrace, as if once again convincing me that I had made the right decision. The following Tuesday, Nora took me to the Hillview Community Center for my first art lesson. The studio space was brightly illuminated by long light coming through tall windows, and wooden tables covered with paint stains reminded me of how often artists use their work surfaces as something alive, ready for new experiments and discoveries. The air was filled with the smells of paint, fresh paper, and creative materials, and I felt how this whole atmosphere made me want to create. I looked at the studio around me with interest and anxiety, but when we sat down at the table and the teacher began to explain the basics, my heart was filled with such a strange but familiar feeling, the feeling of home. I took a deep breath, inhaling the soothing scents of acrylic and glue that reigned in the studio air, creating an atmosphere of unprecedented concentration and inspiration around me. A plump woman with charcoal stains on her cheek came up to me with a warm smile. "You must be Cassidy," she said, holding out her hand to me. "I'm Tabitha. Your aunt has told me so much about you." She spoke with such simple but sincere interest that I instantly felt comfortable, as if she had known me all her life. "Let's find you an easel," she continued, leading me through a bright, color-filled room. My nerves gradually evaporated when Tabitha introduced me to my classmates. They nodded and smiled affably, leaving me the space to blend into this friendly atmosphere. I stepped aside and immediately immersed myself in the process. I began to get carried away with experiments with watercolor, and it was as if the world had faded away when I gave myself up to the thrill of creativity. Each brush movement was a new step into an unfamiliar and infinitely attractive universe of self-expression. When the lesson came to an end, Tabitha came up to me with a twinkle in her eyes and applauded. "You have a real talent, an innate gift that requires some care and attention. You can go far. I would like you to join my advanced level group." Her words were a powerful impetus for me, inspiring me to take further steps. Under her attentive gaze, I felt not only support, but also something more. The faith she put into me was the fuel that I had been missing for so long. I stormed out of the studio, my imagination blazing like a fire, filled with ideas for the next steps. Over the next few weeks, I devoted myself entirely to developing my art. I loved every minute I spent searching for new materials and techniques, and this feeling consumed me completely. Nora, noticing my fascination, cleaned out the old barn so that I could use it as a personal studio. It was not just a practical decision, but also a manifestation of her support. Now I had a space for self-expression. I wandered through thrift stores, finding old, abandoned items that could be turned into something new. Experimenting with every possible material, I created paintings that became personal revelations for me. When I proudly showed Nora my work, her eyes lit up. "They are impressive. You have such a unique look," she said admiringly, and I felt the warmth of pride flare up in my chest. She insisted that I exhibit my best housework, making it an integral part of the space. These paintings, though far from perfect, became my statement that I exist, that I have something important that is worth seeing. One day, returning from the market, I noticed Nora talking to a well-dressed stranger. He was tall, with a slight touch of severity, but there was interest in his eyes. "Meet Cassidy," Nora said when she saw me coming. "This is Thomas Green. He owns an art gallery in Hillview, downtown." My eyes widened in surprise when I heard the name. Thomas shook my hand politely and said, "Your aunt just showed me your work. You have an incredible talent for such a young man. With the right mentoring, you can go very far." His words made me blush, and my heart jumped in my chest. Is it really true? Could I really be serious about art? The seed of hope that he planted in my heart soon began to sprout, filled with light and new possibilities. I felt this thought taking root in me, strengthening my confidence that I was on the right track. Nora, noticing my embarrassment, hugged me proudly. "The whole city will soon know your name," she said, and for the first time I dared to imagine a future full of possibilities when my art would light the way. Late one evening, when I was cleaning up after an intense painting session, absorbed in a series of strokes and shades, my mobile phone suddenly buzzed, signaling an incoming call. I looked at the screen where the name was flashing and froze. It was Juliet, my sister. We haven't spoken since I left home a few months ago, and the sudden call from her gave me an unpleasant feeling of anxiety. A heavy knot formed in his stomach, which did not give him rest. She was probably calling on behalf of our parents to undermine my inner world again, so I decided. I thought it would be better to ignore the call, but my curiosity got the better of me. My fingers reached for the phone on their own. "Hello," I replied cautiously, knowing that the spoken words would not be just a formality. "It's me," Juliet's familiar voice replied, and I felt her nervousness echo through me. It wasn't like before, when she always spoke with confidence, imperiously controlling any conversation. She wasn't that decisive, her words were trembling, and her intonation was unlike her usual confidence. I asked calmly, gathering my strength and trying not to betray my confusion. I listened eagerly to her answer, expecting anything but that. "How are you?" I heard you're staying with Aunt Nora, as if she didn't know where to start. Then there was a pause. She said you were fine. Nora is doing great. I listened in silence, listening to her words, and waited for any possible criticism that seemed inevitable to follow from her. But this did not happen. She continued as if she didn't notice how her voice didn't sound the same as before. Well, listen, I've seen some of your paintings on the internet, the ones that the gallery posted. They're just amazing. I almost dropped my phone in surprise. It was so unexpected that I couldn't believe my ears. Juliet, my sister, who was always so cruel and critical, complimented me. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to figure out what was going on, and barely held back the shock. I stammered, as if I couldn't believe my own words. Yes, completely. Her voice became warmer, and her tone became sincere. You're so talented, Cass. I'm very jealous. I would like to create beautiful works of art like you. You can now. Her words, filled with revelation, still sounded like something unthinkable. I fell silent, not knowing what to say. We have always been rivals, like two sides of the same coin, constantly competing for the approval of our parents. But now, in these brief moments of revelation, I began to realize that Juliet might have felt the same way. Strangely enough, we weren't that far apart, and there was more than just competition between us. You found something that you're really passionate about, and you're going for it. But I feel so trapped trying to live up to Mom and Dad's expectations, she continued, and her admission stunned me. These words were like a confession, and it seemed to me that for the first time I heard her real, the one who always hid behind a wall of pride and ideal. Maybe deep down, Juliet and I weren't that much different. Maybe I was always wrong to think that she was perfect and invulnerable. And although I couldn't imagine that she would ever complain about her own life, now I could hear the pain in her voice. I softened my tone and replied, barely holding back the tears that appeared in my eyes from this unexpected communication. Thank you, Jules. It means a lot coming from you. I took a deep breath, trying to control my excitement. But you miss perfection a little bit, don't you? You're getting as straight as a stick trying to hold this image. My words sounded soft, but there was a truth in them that I probably would never have dared to say before. I know, she replied with a long sigh, an almost invisible moan in her voice. Being perfect from the outside is great, but the pressure is insane. I'm tired of working all the time trying to maintain this image. That's... Her voice disappeared, and I felt her words stuck in my throat. She was on the verge of breaking down, and I couldn't help but feel her pain. My heart sank, and I realized how much she might have needed someone to understand her, not condemn her. Why do you think I'm finally broken? She asked, and there was a mixture of surprise and understanding in her question. I was shocked, not believing that Juliet was so open about her feelings. Their expectations were suffocating me. I can't take it anymore. She paused, as if she couldn't find the words for this painful confession. I felt sympathy filling my heart. Understanding what she was going through was almost unbearable. I remembered how I had sought refuge myself, escaping from the same oppression. But now, instead of blaming her or condemning her, I just understood. Nora had given me the courage to really live my life, to live my own, and now Juliet might have been ready to do the same. I told her, trying to put all my support into words, "You're so brave to stand up to them. You'll find your way, Jules. You have to believe in yourself." Juliet sounded surprised, but also grateful. Maybe I wasn't ready to understand her before, but now, in this late-night conversation, we'd become closer. You deserve this freedom too, Juliet said, her voice, despite her fatigue, sounding with a note of genuine warmth that made me shudder. I felt like something real had finally awakened between us, something more than ever before. I wish I had your courage. These words were said not with envy, but with real admiration and, perhaps, even a desire to learn how to live in your own way. Hey, Is it okay if I come to visit sometime? She continued, and there was genuine interest in her words. I would love to see it. I'd like to see your studio. The warm feeling of those words blossomed in my chest like a ray of sunlight on a cloudy day. The studio, my personal space, which I loved so much, has finally become something more than just a place to work. This was my refuge, my zone of freedom, and now Juliet, my sister, could enter this world, even if only in my imagination. Of course, I replied, I can't wait to show you around. Or maybe I could even give you some drawing lessons. My words were full of fun, and I was surprised myself how sincerely I wanted to share this part of my life. Juliet laughed. It was a laugh I hadn't heard in years. It was light, sincere, filled with something I hadn't felt for a long time, warmth and joy. I would really like to, she said with such simplicity, as if all the years of distance between us had disappeared in an instant. I miss you, sis, I confessed, and the words came out so naturally that I could hardly believe their own truth. It was a confession that I've probably been waiting for all my life, and suddenly, right now, it became a reality. I miss you too, Juliet replied softly, and those words resonated in my heart. We said goodbye with a promise to reunite soon, and when I hung up the phone, it seemed to me that the whole world around me had suddenly changed. Juliet and I had been rivals for so long, forever competing for the affection of our parents, that now this feeling of family connection seemed like something completely new, unfamiliar. And yet, it was easy to accept. I sat down on the sofa, putting the phone in the chunder, and was surprised by this sudden change. It was strange to realize that I could now approach Juliet not as a competitor, but as a sister who might also be looking for her own way. We could walk this path together, shoulder to shoulder. The next few months flew by in a flurry of creative excitement, painting sessions, gallery shows, meetings with visitors and constant visits from Juliet. My sister and I were getting closer than ever. I shared my passion for art with her, and she, in turn, began to find something of her own in it. There were moments when she and I sat in my studio, painted, discussed colors, shapes, and created new ideas, and it was really wonderful. I never thought that at some point we could become allies, not rivals. While I was enjoying our relationship, I increasingly felt that I had found my true purpose. Before, I had sought support in galleries and major exhibitions, but now I felt that it was in teaching, in transferring knowledge and in communicating with students that I could find something truly valuable. Suddenly I became a mentor, and it brought me great joy. In classes at the Tabitha Community Center, I shared my experiences with others, and this process not only enriched them, but also me. I felt that I had finally found what was really important to me, art not only as a personal practice, but also as a way to connect people, to open up new horizons. And then one day, when Nora and I were cooking dinner, the phone rang again. I was surprised to pick up the phone, not expecting any important news. Thomas Green's cheerful voice was on the other end of the line. Cassidy, his voice sounded so enthusiastic that I immediately felt that this was something important. I have wonderful news for you. My heart started beating faster. There will be an exhibition at the prestigious Burton Gallery in Los Angeles, and they are very interested in presenting your work. This could be a big breakthrough for you. My thoughts whirled like a whirlwind. Burton Gallery. She was famous for representing only the most promising artists, and if my work gets a chance to be there, it will open up completely new horizons for me. My career could have skyrocketed, and at one point I even felt like the desire to get there almost drowned out everything else. Seeing my shocked expression, Nora grabbed the phone and started chatting animatedly with Thomas. When the conversation ended, she grabbed me in a wild dance around the kitchen, as if we had both won some important award. Oh dear, can you believe that your talent is finally recognized? Her words were full of delight and joy. We should celebrate this. But when joy seemed to fill every cell of my body, realization came. The Burton Gallery showcase is not just a chance for me. It was also an opening for everyone, including my parents. I could imagine how they would look at my work. All of them will be in the spotlight, they will become part of the public discussion, and this could not but cause me concern. Because now they're going to find out about me and what I'm doing. Elite social circles, once the news reaches them, they will not be able to remain silent. These words kept spinning in my head like heavy shadows, giving me no peace. I knew that for people like my parents, their environment, status, and public opinion mean the most. It is possible that my new life in the art world will not only be an unpleasant surprise for them, but also a challenge to their own self-image. All these years, they've gotten used to seeing me in the same light, an ideal daughter, obedient and subject to their expectations. Now, like a star, I was breaking out of their orbit. When I hesitantly expressed my concerns, Nora brushed them off as if they were an accidental fluff that could easily be brushed off her shoulders. "Don't worry about your parents' disapproval," she said, and there was a confidence in her voice that had something sacred about it, as if she believed in me as much as she had never believed in me before. "This is your destiny, and no one can stand in your way." Her words were like an encouraging light in the darkness of the night. Nora's confidence was contagious. She warmed, lifted to her feet. I understood that if she believed in me, then I could handle everything. The moment in my life when everything was under control, when I could act as my soul commanded, came like a long-awaited spring. The excitement of this unprecedented opportunity, of the Burton Gallery, of the attention I received, overshadowed all doubts. In the end, I made up my mind. I'll deal with the potential consequences when the time comes. Let the storm and anger fall on me. I will be ready. Next month, I put all my efforts into creating a new collection. Each piece became more and more personal, more and more explicit. I worked tirelessly, absorbed in my creations. The hours flew by unnoticed. My brushes and paints became an extension of my body. My paintings were like a breath, like the thrill of my soul. I felt like every canvas was saturated with me, my experiences, my thoughts, my dreams. Finally, that important day came. I went to Los Angeles with Nora and Juliet to help organize my exhibition at the famous gallery. When we arrived at this famous place, I felt the excitement going over the edge. The gallery struck me with its elegance. It is completely clean, spacious, as if it was created to show the best works of art. Everything around was designed in strict colors, with soft lighting that emphasized every detail. Fashionable visitors, confident in themselves and their tastes, admired the works that I was so proud of. My heart was pounding in my chest as I stood in front of the stand where my work was displayed, and my last name was emblazoned at the bottom as an important touch. It was like a dream. I couldn't believe that my paintings were here, in such a prestigious place. Everything I dreamed of has become a reality. Nora came up to me and hugged me tightly, as always supportive, as always confident that I can do much more than I imagine. "Go enjoy your moment," she said. "The shining star." With her words, I felt better, as if the whole weight of the world had suddenly slipped off my shoulders. I stepped forward, feeling every word of delight and every look full of admiration and respect. As the evening progressed, more and more people came up to me, discussing my art. Thomas was delighted. "The curiosity you have aroused is incredible. Collectors are already starting to order your work." Late at night, when most of the guests had already left, a reporter from the LA Times approached me for an interview. I was over the moon with happiness. It was the moment I had been dreaming about for so long: recognition, success, attention. When I returned to Nora's cottage, I was literally soaring with joy. I was on a wave of creative recognition that I had never been on before, but like any wave, its afterglow quickly disappeared. In the morning, I opened the newspaper, and the arts section immediately caught my eye. There, among other news, was a notable article about my exhibition. I froze when I read the line, "The talented daughter of Richard and Elizabeth Stewart, who has made a name for herself in the art world." It was like a blow. Now that my work was in plain sight, I had to face the fact that my parents could no longer take credit for my success. Everything I achieved was mine, only mine. And although I was proud, this realization did not bring me relief. My parents' anger is sure to be swift and violent. I knew they couldn't hide their disappointment. If before I was their pride, an obedient daughter who always tried to meet their expectations, now I had become something alien and inappropriate for them. I prepared for this, for the coming storm. I understood that I might have to go through a brutal clash with their ambitions, but I was ready to accept it, no matter how difficult it was. My life was no longer the same as it was before the exhibition. And I knew that now I would be moving on my own path. Of course, that evening I received a sharp voice message from my mother. The voice was as cold as ice, full of contempt and indignation. How dare you continue this childhood fantasy art career behind our backs? You'll regret the day you decided to embarrass us in public. Mark my words, you ungrateful scoundrel. Her words were like a cold knife that cut me deeply. They burned, penetrating into my very heart, threatening to shake my newfound confidence. But despite that pain, I refused to let her words ruin my happiness. Not this time. I knew it was mine, my destiny and my gift. After all, if my success has challenged my parents' ego, so be it. I was no longer the child who obeys their expectations and lives by their rules. That was my way. So be it. No bitterness, no sense of guilt could destroy the freedom that I had finally established for myself. It was my freedom to be myself, to follow my calling, despite the opposition. And although I understood that the road ahead could be rocky, now my roots were stronger than ever. I was a steady flame, ready to withstand any storm wind, no matter how fierce it was. However, even amid all this self-confidence, on the night of my next major exhibition at the gallery, I felt something familiar, a bundle of nerves, almost painful, from the memories of the disastrous consequences of the previous exhibition. I knew my parents would show up again to sabotage this event. This thought did not leave me, forcing every cell of my body to tense up in anticipation. I stood in a fitted black dress with high heels, anxiously looking at the continuous stream of guests filling the gallery. The north wing was decorated with a restrained but refined style, and every visitor seemed absorbed not only in the art, but also in the atmosphere. Everything in this place breathed perfection, and even those who did not understand the intricacies of painting could not help but admit that there was something more than just an exhibition here. It was a world into which I had already fit. Juliet and Nora surrounded me, trying to support me, feeling my anxiety. Juliet, noticing my sighs, leaned towards me and said softly, "Don't worry, tonight is your night. I'm not going to let Mom and Dad ruin everything." Her words were like a silent vow, and for a moment I felt confident. She was there, as always, ready to protect me. But before I could answer, they came. The devil himself. I froze when my mother came up to me, followed by my father with a stony face. It was a moment when time didn't seem to exist. The whole room seemed to freeze when her piercing gaze slid over me with obvious disgust. "Well, if it's not the prodigal daughter," she said icily, her voice sounding like a punch in the chest. "Crawl back for the money, huh?" My mother's words hung in the air, and it seemed to me that everyone around me heard them like a thunderclap. I didn't move, didn't give in to her attacks. I stood like a stone with my head held high, refusing to cringe at her words. "I'm here for art, not for you," I replied stiffly, feeling my words echo in the empty space between us. The father chuckled, his face blank and cold like his words. "This artistic nonsense won't last long. Once you're done with this childish rebellion, you'll go back to where you belong." His taunt was like a heavy hammer digging into my soul, but I didn't let myself break. Anger boiled up in me, but I held my tongue so as not to stoop to their level. I knew that their words were just an attempt to get me back into their network. I wouldn't let them ruin this moment. It was my day. My victory. And suddenly, as if by fate, Thomas eagerly rushed to my parents, cheerfully greeting them. "It's great that you could see how your talented daughters work," he said. His energy was as bright as the fire that burned in him. The mother laughed nervously, but her laughter was not sincere. "Oh, yeah, we just had to see what all the fuss was about," she added, breaking into sarcasm. "Although I would hardly consider finger painting a talent." I blushed with humiliation, even though I didn't let those words get to me. But Thomas didn't back down. As always, he supported me, continuing to discuss my work with my parents with sincere interest. His energy was so vibrant and pure that it seemed to dissolve all the dark clouds that my parents were trying to bring that evening. "I assure you, Mrs. Stewart, your daughter is exceptionally gifted. Just look for yourself," Thomas began with genuine enthusiasm, while in his voice there was not only professional confidence, but also sincere faith in my abilities. He led my parents to one of my most striking works, an abstract piece inspired by wildlife, with its blurred dynamics and riot of colors, each line of which sparkled with life. It was a work that reflected my inner harmony and desire for freedom. The mother, seeing the painting, wrinkled her nose in obvious disgust. I felt her gaze, full of contempt, penetrate the canvas, assessing not so much the work as my desire to escape from their control. The father stood with his arms crossed over his chest, with a stony face, expressing neither interest nor surprise. "Immobile amateur work in best," he announced loudly, his words cutting through the silence, attracting the surprised glances of several nearby visitors. These words cut into my heart, but their uncertainty and rudeness only fueled the fire of rage inside. How dare they come here just to belittle me and humiliate my success? I wanted to turn around and leave, forget about them, but I stood there, clenching my fists, trying to keep this rage from coming out. Before I could lose my cool, Juliet stepped forward. Her eyes were sparkling, and I felt her energy enveloping me, giving me strength. "You're wrong," she said firmly, looking at her parents defiantly. "Cassidy achieved this through sheer talent and hard work. Unlike you, she's not fake or pretentious. Her art comes from within, and you can't understand it." These words echoed in the hall, and all those present suddenly fell silent. Her mother's cheek twitched with rage when she was challenged. The silence became unbearable, but I didn't look away. Thomas, standing next to me, gently took my hand. His touch was quiet but sure. "Let your work speak for itself, Cassidy. Stay stylish and rise above this pettiness." His words filled me with strength, and I straightened my shoulders proudly. He was right, I didn't need to stoop to the level of their petty reproaches. I walked past them as if they were just fleeting shadows that couldn't outshine me. When I turned to look at my guests, at the fans of my work, I felt my soul filled with warmth and gratitude. Their conversations about my painting, about how they feel about each piece, warmed me more than any compliment. My love for art shone, and I saw how it became visible to everyone around me. After the show, Nora came up to me, hugged me tightly and whispered, "You were great tonight. I'm so proud of you for taking the high road." These words warmed me more than any ovation. We left the gallery, and I felt lighter than ever, despite the brutal sabotage of my parents. This evening was a real triumph. It became a resounding success, a confirmation of my talent, and the world finally took notice. My parents could no longer control my path. I was free, and it was my time. The bitter envy of my parents no longer had the power to restrain me. I broke free and found myself completely. The world has seen and heard me now. My art has finally started to sound. And although I knew that the road I was on was not yet complete, I felt my roots digging into the ground, making me stronger. Within a few weeks after the showdown in the gallery, I became more and more immersed in my work, concentrating on the next step. However, as strange as it was, everything was quiet on their part, almost too quiet. "It's the calm before the storm," as Nora warned me. Richard and Elizabeth are not the type to leave things as they are, she said, with obvious concern in her voice. I tried to focus on my art and teaching. I found solace in routine tasks, in classes with students, and in creating new works. Sales continued to grow, and new customers, delighted with my talent, sought to get my works, which, as I learned, became a real hit. It was a success I couldn't even dream of, but one thing was clear: this path was just beginning. One morning, when the sky was covered with gray clouds and the wind rustled insignificantly outside the windows, I was sitting in my cozy corner, drowning in silence. My phone suddenly vibrated, and I glanced at the screen, expecting a regular call. However, the number that came up was familiar, and it caused me instant alarm. Julie. She usually didn't call me this early, and her voice has always carried a hidden heaviness in recent weeks. When I answered, her voice was strangled, and there were tears in it. "Cass, this is Mom. And Dad's company is failing. All of Dad's biggest clients' deals disappear overnight. They can lose everything." The words that came out of her mouth fell on me like a bolt from the blue. I sat stunned, unable to immediately comprehend what exactly was going on. Her brain refused to believe, but her desperate voice left no doubt. Our parents have always been able to build luxurious, truly large-scale business empires. Dad's financial firm is the mainstay of their success and our privileges. And now, when everything they have been creating for years began to crumble, I couldn't figure out how to feel. It was a strange feeling, as if some higher justice had finally been done, as if I was some kind of invisible court that was just watching this process. But at the same time, compassion won out. How can you be happy about the fall of people who have been your family all this time? I couldn't wish such devastation on anyone. In the following weeks, the situation got worse and worse. We all watched as deals collapsed one by one, as employees, realizing the scale of the disaster, began to leave the company, fleeing from its collapse. The social circles that had accepted the Stewarts as a symbol of success and status for so long suddenly turned away, avoiding not only communication, but even any mention of their names. Those who left were only the first. The next ones were those who, although they continued to work with the company, began to show doubts and suspicions. Rumors of questionable business practices filled the city. Like a shadow itself, the fall of the Stewarts became a topic for every discussion, for every look that seemed imbued not so much with regret as with curiosity and disgust. Juliet, no matter what she said, has always remained my link to this world. She was restless, her messages were getting more frequent. We talked a lot, and she almost always tried to keep me informed of what was happening. But her news about her parents only made my confusion worse. I understood that their downfall was the result of their own pride, striving for success at any cost, neglecting humanity for the sake of career heights. I saw how they valued status and prestige, and that was the most important thing for them. And now that their public shame had become a fact, however, it felt like karma had finally caught up with them. Suddenly, as if out of nowhere, their fall became a topic of gossip, and rumors that Dad drinks and Mom practically does not leave her room began to spread like a virus. I could feel their despair growing, as if they were finally beginning to realize the consequences of how badly they treated people. Part of me may have felt a slight sense of satisfaction from their suffering, the feeling that they got what they deserved. But regret was much stronger. Even with everything that has happened, I could not consider their fall worthy of my joy. One evening, as I was sitting in my studio chair, immersed in a new project, the phone lit up again. A familiar number appeared on the screen. Mother. I couldn't pick up the phone right away. What could she tell me? It was such a lull before the storm that I didn't know how to react. The silhouette of her name on the screen seemed to me something distant and alien, like the last symbol of their world crumbling before my eyes. Cassidy. Her voice was unbearably weak, as if she was exhausted by some painful realization. You must have heard about what's going on. I felt my heart tighten in my chest. Why is she calling me? I answered neutrally, trying to hide my anxiety. Yes, I know. How can I help you? But I caught something more in her voice. She continued, and I listened, unable to interrupt. I just wanted to say that you were right about everything. You were always right. Your father and we've overlooked what's important. You were right, and we were so stupid. Her words pierced me. I felt something cold and heavy squeezing my chest. It wasn't pride that I was right. It was the pain of finally admitting her mistake, but it was too late. Her voice was getting quieter, she was holding back her sobs, but I could understand every word she said. You always wanted only our love, but all we did was control and criticize you. I don't know how to apologize, Cass. We were blind, we didn't see your gift before. I'm so sorry. My mother was crying now, and I was silent, letting her continue. I didn't know what to say. Thoughts raced in my head, but words did not come. I sat stunned in the silence that filled the room, as if not just a sound, but a storm of emotions piercing my heart. All these years that I had been the target of their criticism, their disregard, their manipulation and arrogance seemed like a distant nightmare now. The mother who never confessed her mistakes, who always tried to control everything around her, was different now. And despite the gravity of the moment, I felt the heavy burden that lay on my shoulders ease a little. She finally realized the consequences of her actions, and even though it came too late, it was hard for me to feel angry. Instead, something unexpected was rising in me, a strange mixture of regret and hope. I was silent, not knowing how to react to her words correctly. Endless years had been spent searching for her confession, and now she finally admitted her mistake, but how long have I been waiting for her? This confession did not erase the pain, could not bring back the lost years. I felt empty, as if a part of me had dissolved, standing on the edge between the past and the present. We awkwardly said goodbye, her sobbing voice still ringing in my ears, and it was so difficult for me to say something in response that could comfort her or at least give her a sense of completion. The call left me in a reverie. Maybe over time we would have a chance to establish a relationship, but now I realized that even if it was possible, it would take time, and I was not ready to return to the world they had created. I had my own ways, my own choices, and I was sure of one thing: they could no longer control my life. Whatever happened in the future, I was free now. And this freedom was priceless. My thoughts gradually took me back to my own life, to those positive moments that were now much more important. I focused on my art, which flourished, gaining recognition in circles where I had long been considered an unusual and bright talent. The recognition was important, but the real triumph was how I felt along the way. I didn't just create paintings, I created a place for myself in the world where I could be myself. My work using found objects and mixed media has opened up new horizons for me. Each work has become an act of therapy, a way to free oneself from inner anxieties, ways to transform one's own feelings, the most violent and irreconcilable, into something tangible. In each new work, I felt how my soul was cleansed of pain and resentment, how balance was gradually restored, how I could leave a part of myself in this world without tying myself to other people's expectations. Juliet, my sister, who has always been there for me, has now finally taken a bold step. She moved in with Nora and me, finally breaking with the toxic influences of our parents. I was happy for her. She became part of my new family, and Nora and I were able to provide her with a space where she could find her identity, not be afraid to make mistakes and not live under the yoke of other people's ambitions. We often sat at dinner, laughed and shared our thoughts about the future. Both of us, each in our own way, restored our relationships, but not with those who once controlled us, but with those who accepted us for who we are, with our weaknesses and strengths, with our hopes and disappointments. Juliet soon found her passion, environmental science. It was unexpected, but I felt very proud of her. She was so determined, her eyes were burning with the fire of desire to change the world, to make it cleaner, greener, better. It was the path she chose, and she truly believed in her cause. Unlike our parents, who always put money and prestige above everything, she now sought to leave a mark that would not only be successful, but also meaningful for future generations. We both found our way, and despite the difficult legacy our parents left, we were no longer connected to their ambitions. We have learned to appreciate the moments of real freedom, the fact that we can make choices not according to someone else's rules, but according to our own. And although my parents continued to struggle with the consequences of their financial collapse, I knew that they were busy with their problems, and I could safely move forward. I often thought about that conversation with my mother, about those repentant words that came too late. Yes, I was hoping that someday we could talk, based on understanding, not judgment. But now, at this moment, I was focused solely on my art. Everything that happened in my life was now connected to this. With my struggle, with my happiness, with my paintings that spoke louder than any words. And this voice, this inner world that I was creating, was all I needed to be free. One afternoon, when Juliet and I were relaxing in the backyard, enjoying a photo of lemonade and a conversation, the air was so warm that it seemed as if all nature itself was pausing to enjoy this moment of peace. We laughed, exchanged memories, and everything seemed simple and good like never before. And suddenly, we noticed a figure standing at the side gate. I froze, my heart stopped for a moment. I recognized him, despite the years of separation. My father's tall, slightly bent body, which had once been a symbol of strength and confidence, now stood as alien, out of place in this place. He seemed confused, as if he didn't know how to return to this world that he had once entered so confidently. Cautiously, as if afraid to break this moment of silence, he approached. I couldn't get a word out when his eyes, usually so confident and dominant, now slid between Juliet and me. I felt something jump in my chest, but outwardly I remained calm, as if something deep inside me knew that this moment was inevitable. "Hi, girls," he greeted rudely, and even in this simple greeting there was an uncertainty that I had never heard in his voice. "Sorry for the intrusion." His words hung in the air like a heavy stone, and I noticed how his eyes avoided meeting mine, and then Juliet's. He did step forward and froze at our table. I couldn't figure out exactly what he wanted to say, but I intuitively knew that this moment was important, and I needed to listen to him to the end. I nodded to Juliet, who squeezed my fingers almost imperceptibly in response. I pointed to an empty chair next to me, and my father, hesitantly, almost shamefacedly, sat down with his hands folded in his lap. "I know that I'm probably the last person you want to talk to," he began haltingly, and his voice trembled slightly. I saw how hard it was for him to say those words. "But I owe you both an apology at last. Your mother and I have created impossible standards for you. We criticized you, belittled you. It was so wrong. We were blind to your talents, to your inner strength and spirit. And I'm only realizing it now." He paused, as if trying to collect his thoughts. I remained silent in response, allowing him to continue. It was strange to hear his confessions. His images, his way of speaking, his dominant figure in the past, all this was due to the fact that I always tried to hide, ignore, and suddenly it all came back, bringing me down at this moment. I wasn't ready to forgive, but at the same time I couldn't help but hear. My emotions exploded inside, but I held them back, realizing that this conversation was more for him than for me. "You deserved unconditional love and support. And I'm really sorry that I let you both down as a father," he continued, his voice becoming softer. "Your mother is also deeply remorseful, although I cannot excuse her actions. But I am so sorry." His eyes met mine, and I saw in them something more than just remorse. I saw the fear, the pain of not being able to keep my family together, having lost everything that I once valued so much. And at that moment, despite all the pain, I felt something that I hadn't felt for a long time: compassion. Not anger, but compassion, which gradually replaced everything else. He was a man just like me, only his mistakes, his choices, His ways were more destructive, and now he realized it. I answered quietly, with restraint, but with understanding. Thanks, Dad. It takes time to rebuild trust, but Juliet and I both find happiness on our own terms. He nodded, and I noticed a glimmer of pride in his tired face, pride that we were able to choose our path despite everything. Perhaps he realized that despite his mistakes, we have become strong. He exhaled as if a heavy weight had been lifted from his shoulders. You've always been stronger than we gave you credit for, he said, and his eyes shone, albeit with sadness. I wish you both joy, happiness, and all the best in the future. We talked a little more, clarifying the situation, but I could already feel my soul being freed from these old bonds. When my father left, I felt better. It's like we've split from the past, opening a new chapter. Everything wasn't perfect, and maybe the moment hadn't come yet to completely forget and forgive, but I felt hopeful. The hope that one day we could become a family again, but now a different one, wise, learn from our mistakes. Juliet hugged me, and I felt like everything was filled with light again. We both looked to the future with a new perspective, with the belief that everything would be better. It was just beginning. We wrote our destinies, and now they did not depend on the past. We were the masters of our own lives, and it filled me with a relief I hadn't felt in a long time.